Praise the Lord. Welcome to this explainer where we take ancient texts and break them down to reveal incredibly relevant, real-world strategies for our lives today. Okay, let's dive right into this. Have you ever felt just completely trapped in a toxic environment? Maybe a workplace where your boss constantly moves the goalposts, or a family dynamic that's just draining you both emotionally and financially? Well, today we're going to look at one of the most thrilling survival and escape stories from the ancient world. It's Jacob's desperate flight from his father-in-law, Laban. We're going to use the text of Genesis 31 to uncover exactly how to recognize, survive, and ultimately escape a deeply toxic situation.
Seriously, what would you do if your boss changed your wages 10 times? Because that is exactly the brutal 20-year ordeal Jacob endured. We so often think of these ancient figures as living in a totally different universe, but Jacob's situation with Laban, it's literally the ultimate modern-day toxic workplace and family drama all rolled into one. He was working for a father-in-law who used him, manipulated him, and continually altered his compensation for one simple reason: to keep him trapped.
Phase 1. The breaking point, and recognizing a toxic environment. You see, you can endure mistreatment for a really long time, but eventually the environment becomes so hostile that staying is just no longer an option. For Jacob, the writing was suddenly on the wall. He literally overhears Laban's sons actively plotting and complaining, accusing Jacob of stealing their father's wealth. And worse, Jacob noticed that Laban's attitude toward him had completely soured. The mask had officially slipped. And at this exact moment of peak tension, the Lord intervenes. God tells Jacob, "Go back to the land of your fathers and to your relatives, and I will be with you." Prompted by this divine green light, Jacob acts, but he doesn't do it openly. The environment is way too dangerous for that. Instead, he calls a secret, off-site meeting out in the fields where his flocks are, pulling his wives, Rachel and Leah, aside to lay out his case.
During this secret meeting, Jacob lays out a classic case of wage theft. On one side, we've got Laban, constantly changing Jacob's wages 10 times, always trying to rig the system so Jacob ends up with nothing. But on the other side, we have God stepping in as the ultimate protector. Jacob explains to his wives that if Laban said the speckled flocks would be his wages, suddenly all the flocks gave birth to speckled young. God effectively overrode Laban's manipulation, stepping in to ensure Jacob received his fair severance package before leaving.
And this brings us to a stunning realization from Rachel and Leah. They say, "Does he not regard us as foreigners? Not only has he sold us, but he has used up what was paid for us." I mean, wow. This is a heartbreaking moment of clarity. Laban's own daughters recognize that they are being financially and emotionally used by their own father. They realize all the wealth God took from Laban actually belonged to them and their children. So they tell Jacob, "Do whatever God has told you." They are fully on board to escape.
Phase 2. The secret escape, leaving without notice.
With his family finally united, Jacob initiates what we would call today an unannounced resignation. There is no 2-week notice here. They don't leave a forwarding address. Jacob packs up his children, puts his wives on camels, gathers all his livestock, and simply flees. He crosses the Euphrates River and heads straight for the hill country of Gilead. He completely ghosted his toxic boss. On day 1, Jacob flees secretly. It isn't until day 3 that Laban even finds out Jacob is gone. And Laban is furious. He gathers his relatives and ruthlessly hunts them down. It takes a full 7 days of high-speed pursuit for Laban to finally catch up with Jacob in the hill country of Gilead. You can almost feel the impending disaster here as the toxic boss closes in on the employee who dared to walk away.
But just as disaster looms, divine intervention completely changes the game. The night before Laban overtakes Jacob's camp, God comes to Laban the Aramean in a dream. And God gives him a very strict, terrifying warning. He says, "Be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad." God acts as an impenetrable shield around Jacob, neutralizing Laban's power to destroy him just before the inevitable confrontation.
Phase 3. The tense confrontation, or as I like to think of it, the exit interview. Think of this as the absolute most hostile, aggressive exit interview you can possibly imagine. Laban catches up, but because of God's warning, his hands are physically tied. So what does a manipulator do when they can't use force? They manipulate the narrative. Laban guilt-trips Jacob. He claims Jacob carried his daughters off like captives and deeply laments that he wasn't allowed to kiss his grandchildren goodbye. Classic move, right? He paints himself as the victim. Jacob cuts right through the guilt trip with absolute honesty, telling Laban, "I was afraid because I thought you would take your daughters away from me by force." He just tells the plain truth. But then Laban pivots and accuses Jacob of stealing his household gods.
Jacob, fiercely defensive of his integrity and completely unaware of what actually happened, makes a wildly risky vow. He tells Laban that whoever stole the gods will not live, inviting Laban to search the entire camp.
Phase 4, the hidden idols, and Rachel's secret reclamation.
What Jacob didn't know sets up this incredible, nail-biting scenario. Will Laban find the stolen household gods in Rachel's tent? Because Rachel had indeed stolen her father's household gods right before they fled. Now, why would she do that? Well, in the ancient context, these idols often represented family inheritance and rights. For Rachel, this was a secret reclamation. It was an exploited employee taking back what they felt they were rightfully owed after years of systemic abuse and stolen wealth. Laban tears through Jacob's tent, Leah's tent, the servants' tents, finding absolutely nothing. Finally, he enters Rachel's tent. Rachel has taken the household gods, stuffed them inside her camel saddle, and is sitting directly on top of them as her angry father ransacks her living space.
So, how in the world does she survive this? Rachel uses an incredibly clever, real-world excuse. She tells her father, "Don't be angry, my lord, that I cannot stand up in your presence. I'm having my period." It is a brilliant tactical move. It successfully stops her father's aggressive search dead in its tracks. Laban refuses to disturb her, and he leaves the tent completely empty-handed.
Phase 5. Setting firm boundaries and airing out the 20-year grievance.
Laban's failed search becomes the ultimate catalyst for Jacob's explosive breaking point. After 20 years of biting his tongue, enduring all that manipulation, and surviving a grueling cross-country hunt, Jacob finally takes Laban to task. He unloads the ultimate HR grievance list against a deeply toxic boss. Jacob lays out his undeniable hardships. Consumed by scorching heat in the day, frozen by cold at night, utterly sleep-deprived. If a wild beast tore an animal, Jacob had to bear the loss out of his own pocket. He worked 14 grueling years for his wives, 6 years for his flocks, all while having his wages changed 10 times. Jacob makes it incredibly clear, if the God of his father hadn't been with him, Laban would have sent him away completely empty-handed.
Jacob's undeniable truth forces Laban to fold. Laban cannot argue with the facts of his own abuse, nor can he fight God's warning. Laban is forced to pivot again, proposing a covenant. And listen, this isn't just a friendly handshake. This is a binding legal settlement to permanently end their conflict and define their separation once and for all.
To finalize this, they rely on two ancient concepts, Gilead and Mizpah. They gather stones into a heap and set up a pillar. Laban calls it a witness heap and a watchtower. This was basically the ancient equivalent of a mutual restraining order or a strict non-compete clause. It was a firm physical boundary line. They both took an oath, calling on God as the judge, swearing they would never cross past this heap of stones to harm the other person ever again. It completely sealed their physical and emotional separation.
Phase 6. 3 actionable daily steps for applying Genesis 31 today.
So how do we take this dramatic ancient escape and actually use it? Because the strategies hidden in Genesis 31 are exactly what you need if you find yourself dealing with your own Laban today. Here are your 3 takeaways. First, recognize when to walk away from toxic situations. Just like Jacob saw Laban's attitude change and heard the toxic whispering, you have to trust your gut when an environment becomes hostile. Don't stay forever hoping a toxic boss or family member will magically change. Second, trust a higher power for protection. Jacob relied on God's intervention, and God provided his severance and shielded him from Laban's wrath. You don't have to fight every single battle alone. And third, establish clear physical boundaries. You need to build your own Mizpah stones. Create legally or socially binding boundaries, whether that's finding a new job, blocking a phone number, or putting some serious physical distance between you that prevents the toxic person from crossing over to harm you.
I'm going to leave you with this question to think about today. Are there witness heaps you need to build in your own life to protect your peace? Who or what do you need to draw a firm boundary with today? Take a lesson from Jacob, secure your peace, and don't look back. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Please be sure to like, share, and subscribe.